There's a problem with body mass index, and I think I can illustrate it pretty well with this picture. On one hand, we have Seth Rogen, comedic legend, and possessor of what you might call a dad bod, BMI somewhere around 28, 29. And then we have Jalen Hurts, greatest modern quarterback and easy pick for Super Bowl MVP. If the Birds defense can get their act together, BMI somewhere around 29 or 30. If you were just looking at those numbers, you would classify both as overweight and nearer to the obese side of the scale. But clearly there's a difference here. BMI, which is only a function of weight and height, is an incredibly blunt tool with no ability to distinguish if that excess weight is from muscle or fat. And that's a big deal, because while both tissues are metabolically active, a pound of muscle burns around 10 calories per day and increases the basal metabolic rate. A pound of fat burns just 2 to 3 calories a day, promotes inflammation, and leads to metabolic diseases like diabetes. BMI is blind to these differences. We need better metrics of body composition. And sure, we have DEXA scans and MRIs, but those are expensive and time-consuming. We need something simple, reproducible, reliable, and cheap. The answer might be right in the palms of our hands. When you go to shake someone's hand, you might just be performing the single most prognostic physical exam maneuver available, because it turns out that grip strength is a consistent and reliable indicator of muscle mass, and beyond that, the risk of death. This week, we're going to focus on the use of grip strength as a secondary method to assess risk in people with elevated BMIs to help tease apart your Seth's Rogen from your Jalen's Hurts, so to speak, thanks to this study appearing in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. The authors were interested in a concept called preclinical obesity. That sounds a bit odd, but it's common. Preclinical obesity is defined as obesity without diagnosed complications of obesity, like diabetes, liver disease, low testosterone, sleep apnea, or any of the other conditions that occur in the setting of obesity. These are people who, save for the weight, are healthy, for now. The authors hypothesized that staying healthy would be a function of muscle mass. Muscle, in their conception, is the anti-inflammatory yin to fat's raging yang. They further hypothesized that grip strength as an indicator of muscle mass could be used to predict transitions from preclinical obesity to obesity with complications, and from that state to death. To see if they were correct, they turned to the UK Biobank, a favorite data set of mine, which contains over 90,000 individuals with preclinical obesity, followed for an average of 13 years. Now, a note before we get too deep into this. I opened this piece by pointing out that BMI is a really bad marker of body composition, and the authors knew this. So to be obese, by their definition, an individual not only had to have a BMI above 30, they had to have some other measure of adiposity, like an elevated waist circumference or waist-hip ratio or body fat percentage. So we have people who are probably really carrying some extra pounds around, not NFL QBs, if you get my meaning. But remember, at the start of follow-up, they had no other conditions we associate with obesity. A lot can change over 13 years, though. Over that period of follow-up, 53% of the participants developed at least one obesity-related disease, labeled here as first dysfunction, but you can't always find le mot juste. Half of those who developed one dysfunction would go on to develop at least a second, and overall, just under 10% of the total population died. But you can see here that the risk of death was much higher among those with additional obesity-related diseases. Enter grip strength. All patients had their maximum grip strength in both hands assessed using a device like this, a hydraulic hand dynamometer. The average value was taken. Individuals were then split into 3 tertiles based on grip strength and sex. For men, the top tertile had a grip strength above 44 kilograms. For women, 26 kilograms. Now at baseline, those with higher grip strength were quite different from those with lower grip strength. They were a bit younger, had slightly higher education, and were more likely to be employed. Biochemically, they had slightly lower hemoglobin A1Cs, a measure of blood sugar control, and lower C-reactive protein, a measure of inflammation. They were also more likely to engage in regular physical activity. Broadly, they were healthier to start. But the authors took all those baseline differences into account statistically and then assessed a number of questions. First, would people with more grip strength be less likely to transition to that first dysfunction category? Indeed, they would. Those with the firm grips were about 20% less likely to transition from preclinical to clinical obesity than those in the lowest tertile. They were also 13% less likely to die overall. And the study didn't stop there. Over 6,000 of the patients in the dataset also had a more expensive measure of body composition, DEXA scan, or MRI. Both of these are superior to BMI in terms of assessing body composition, but MRI clearly gives you more detail since it can distinguish muscle mass from other lean mass that a DEXA scan cannot. And that detail was important because the more muscle mass was seen on MRI, the lower the risk of progression from preclinical to clinical obesity, and the lower the risk of overall mortality. The authors report that grip strength was highly correlated with MRI measures of muscle mass, but they don't give us a measure of the strength of that correlation, unfortunately. Still, this is a strong suggestion that the thing we're really capturing with grip strength is muscle mass. It's worth pausing to ask a simple question. Why grip strength? I actually think it's sort of an ingenious functional measure of muscle strength and quality. For one thing, people don't really tend to train their grip strength, baseball players aside. If we were looking at bicep strength or quadricep strength, we'd get a lot of noise from people who specifically work those muscles out. Grip strength, I think, is a better measure of your true underlying muscle function. That means, of course, that you should not read a study like this and decide that you should go around squeezing stress balls. I don't think there's anything protective about grip strength per se. It's simply that grip strength is a good marker of overall metabolic and functional health. But I bet if you monitor your grip strength while engaging in other healthy lifestyle activities, you might see some improvement even without training. The study is not without some limitations, of course. The main one is that it only included people with an elevated BMI. The fact of the matter is there are plenty of people with excess adiposity who actually have a normal or only slightly elevated BMI. Look, I'm right there with you. I look at the scale and calculate my BMI and sort of squint a little and decide to ignore it because I'm like Jalen Hurts, right? But the reality is quite the opposite. A 2023 study examining DEXA scans in US adults with normal BMIs found that around 50% of them had obesity by body fat percentage. The problem with BMI is not really that the cutoffs label people as overweight or obese when they aren't. The problem is actually that it classifies people as normal when they're not. Grip strength is not going to solve all these problems, but it is a start. It seems clear to me that we need to be treating fat and muscle as two separate, opposing, and interrelated tissues in the body. And until we have good, cheap, reliable measures of both, we won't have a real grip on the risk of those downstream diseases. For Medscape, I'm Perry Wilson.